Are you tired of being told what to think and how to act? Well, you are not alone. In case you haven't realized it, you have an internal GPS. It knows all you need to know about how to live your life. So it's about time you stopped letting the media and the government tell you what is true for you. In fact, it is exactly that time. It's time to think for yourself. And here to make sure you're doing just that is your host, mediator, author, and lawyer, Carol Gold.
Hi, it's Sunday, May 4th. I'm Carol Gold, and welcome to Think for Yourself. I want to talk a bit about the word, the written word, the spoken word, and I want to talk about it in both a religious but also in I want to call it a quantum physics context. And if all that sounds kind of weird, just bear with me because I'm really talking to you from my heart, from my brain today. No show prep, just a lot of thoughts that have been coming my way as a result of some things that I've seen and heard. So let me start with the spiritual word. Let me start with that. So in Christianity, and as you know, I'm a Jew, I'm not Christian, but I know that in Christianity, it says in the beginning was the Word. So obviously the Word is very kind of sacrosanct, meaning speech. The Word, in this case, it's the word of Jesus, right? But it's talking about the importance of communicating, I guess, certain principles, certain beliefs, certain ideals. In Judaism, the word is equally important, but not in the same sense that it is in Christianity. After all, I mean, Moses, right? God speaks to Moses at Mount Sinai, and Moses brings with him the commandments, the words that God gives him, again, communicating principles and ideals for human behavior. So the word, in a spiritual sense, is incredibly important. I don't know exactly how that pans out in Islam, but I want to make a point about Judaism and Christianity, because there's the literal word and there's the figurative word. In both religions, I guess it's Christian fundamentalists and Jewish Orthodox fundamentalists who take the word literally. In the case of Christianity, it's the word of Jesus as brought forward in the New Testament. In the case of Judaism, it's literally everything that's in the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, which is what's commonly called the Old Testament. For those who are not fundamentalist, either Christians or Jews, meaning Orthodox Jews, there are interpretations and variations of how those, quote, words are actualized, how they're lived. Also, in Christianity, even those who are literal, who are fundamentalists, Christianity experienced the Reformation in the 16th century, and it went a long way toward influencing the development of Christianity in the West. Similarly, in Judaism, while there was never a Reformation, once the Second Temple was destroyed in 70 CE, which is the Common Era, meaning AD in Christianity on the Christian calendar, once the Second Temple was destroyed and the Ark of the Covenant no longer existed and the Holy of Holies no longer existed, or at least were no longer accessible, then Rabbinic Judaism, meaning the rabbis, began to interpret and pass down the way in which Judaism should be practiced. And again, some of those literal statements in the Torah, and I'll give you an example, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, right? It doesn't mean that literally once Rabbinic Judaism begins to interpret as to how people are to live that dictum. Because what it actually turns out to mean is just compensation. So an eye for an eye, meaning not a literal eye, but compensation that would be commensurate with whatever the damage done was. Okay, so maybe you get my drift as to interpretation of language, of the word in the religious context, regardless of religion. So yes, Christianity had its Reformation, which colored and, in a way maybe, softened or more generalized the teachings of strict Middle Age Catholicism or Christianity then. And with Judaism, the same thing happened. There was a softening, an interpretation. So whether it was the Torah or whether it was the parables of Jesus in the instance of Christianity, those things became interpreted. One could argue, or at least consider the possibility, that they were modernized to some extent, meaning they were made more livable in a modern world and not taken so literally. I make an issue of this because I was watching some things on X today, and there were some videos of both Muslim men and how they were treating their wives, and also some Muslim imams, religious leaders, both here in the United States and around the world, talking about the intentions of Islam. Two things were pretty clear. One is that Islam, even today, condones, meaning allows, permits a man to hit his wife, beat his wife. And women are allowed, if they are a conquered community, if they are a conquered group in war, females conquered are allowed to be sex slaves to Muslim men. Also, I listened to these imams talking about the intention of Islam, which is to globally institute Sharia, and using the Quran and quoting the Quran as to why that is incumbent upon Muslims to do that, to subjugate all other religions, actually to subjugate their people, either convert them or kill them or make them slaves, or to completely subjugate other religions, that they no longer exist in the sense that the only acceptable and practicing religion is Islam. Okay, why am I going down this path? Well, let me now shift to what I said earlier, which is I wanted to talk about the word in the context of both religion and quantum physics. We all know that at the most primary level, everything is energy. Everything is energy. And I have written about this. I have a book about this. While I am a God-believing person, I also find a great deal of support and common sense and practical living in understanding energy and how it is to be used. And so I coined a word, right-useness, and I got it from the word righteousness. Righteousness without an O is right-useness. The pronunciation, that's what it would be, R-I-G-H-T-E-U-S-N-E-S-S, without the O. And I think it's very telling, because to be righteous in a religious sense is a tremendous responsibility and requires stellar behavior, high standards, complying with religious law, and I would think that most people would feel that they could never consider themselves to be a righteous person. But if you think about energy for a moment and not religion, if you just think about energy and its use, and you think about the rightful use of energy or right-useness, when you use energy properly, you actually would become a righteous person. And here's why. There are ways to use energy. There are correct ways and there are incorrect ways. Let me give you the example I always use, which is if you have an appliance that you've bought in the United States, and bear with me because I have a slight allergy problem today, so talking is a little challenging, but if you buy an electric appliance in the United States and it's, at 110 voltage, and you plug it in, it works, it's fine. But if you take that appliance to France or to England or to some other European country and you plug it in, what happens? Well, it's a different voltage, it's 220, and you blow the circuit. You break the circuit, you damage the appliance, maybe permanently, but certainly temporarily for sure. You cut off the proper flow of energy because you're not using it correctly. You're not respecting let's call them the laws, that surround the correct use of that appliance and that energy or that electricity as it is brought to the socket where you plug it in. You can make it work, but you need an adapter. You need an adapter. It is the same thing in human behavior. I like to say that we're all born with a quantum of energy. A quantum is a packet, right? That's the definition. A quantum is a packet. I like to say we're all born with a quantum of energy. And for the time that we're here on earth in our bodies, we get the opportunity to use that energy any way we want. It's called free will. And you can use it any way you want. You can use it correctly or you can use it incorrectly. So what is correct and what is incorrect? Well, as a general statement, I would say that the correct use of energy always winds up in the highest good for all concerned, the greater good for all concerned. Let me just take that a step further. Or it's always life enhancing. The correct use of energy is always consistent with creation. When you use energy incorrectly, the opposite happens. You're not in alignment with creation. You destroy, you damage and or destroy depending on the severity of the incorrect use and how long it goes on. Meaning, now let's get back to the word. Let's take the word love. If I have a quantum of energy in my life to use, and I'm in relationship to other humans, and I love them, then my relationship with them will be one that is consistent with creation, and it will manifest healthy, expansive relationships. If I use some of my quantum of energy to hate people, that is not consistent with creation. It's not life enhancing. It's damaging and it's ultimately destructive. So, words are very important, and how we use them are very important. How we see them, how we interpret them, how we manifest them. Now let me get back to Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. The literal words of the Torah, of the first 5 books of Moses, over the centuries have been hashed and rehashed and analyzed and questioned and honed, all with the intention to be as consistent as true to the original as possible, but also still making it possible for people to live the guidance that came through Moses. And so much of the violence and instruction in the Torah that would seem completely anathema to us today is no longer a requirement of the religion. It was something that was necessary at the time based on the, again, energy, the frequency, or the consciousness at which humanity was existing at that time. All of that has been put aside, modified, and the best example is an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It was probably literal when initially given, till the rabbis made it just compensation for damage. Christianity, similarly, in the Reformation, some of the strictness and the narrowness of Catholicism as it was preached and practiced by the hierarchy in the Middle Ages, some of the cruelty that took place in the name of God, the rack and other torture chambers or torture methods, the Crusades, those were all brought into later century living, brought to the West, modified, and still you stand up for what you believe in, but you don't go on a crusade and you don't torture people on a rack. You know, there's still consequences for action, but it's not that church mandated physical punishment. But it hasn't happened in Islam. And so what's happening is there is a misuse of energy in Islam today because it's never had its rabbinical modification and it's never had its reformation. They are living the literal word of the Quran from whatever century Muhammad lived in. And if you believe that he was the prophet who brought the word of Allah to the world, there's a tremendous amount of violence and subjugation of women in the Quran that is still deemed to be mainstream Islam globally. And it's why now there is this incredible conflict brewing between Islam and every other religion. Because fundamentally, and I say that whether we're talking about Islamists, meaning extremists, terrorists in Islam, or whether we're even talking about mainstream Islam, there is still the command that Allah is the last prophet. Islam is to be the religion of the world. Sharia is to be the law. Women are property. That conflict is coming to a head. It has to. Because Islam in its present form cannot coexist with any other religion. And free will is the gift that all humans, regardless of religion, have been given. We all are created by God, and we're all given the free will to use the energy of creation in whatever way we want. You know, it isn't just Judaism that teaches about the tree of good and evil or the tree of knowledge. There are other versions of that in other religions, meaning that concept of we get to choose. We are told what is dangerous. We are told what we shouldn't do, but we're free to do it as long as we understand there's a consequence. So free will is a human birthright, but it's not in Islam. And this is where the conflict is coming from. This either inability or unwillingness of Islam to move into and through its birth and the violence that came with it to something more palatable, still spiritual, still loving, assuming Allah is a loving God, still loving, still spiritual, still moral, still ethical, but not violent, and not to be imposed on people who would choose otherwise with their free will. I am hoping, there are Muslims. Zuhdi Jasser is one of them. He's a professor here in the United States. He's trying to create a movement that's actually, I forget what he calls it, but it's that modification of Islam that is so needed and seen by some, but not nearly enough. I hope for the sake of Islam, because I hope for its sake that it survives, but I also hope for the world that this concept of right useness, the rightful use of energy, to use love and kindness and compassion and caring and acceptance and understanding, to use those words in our human interaction, and to take the words like hate and subjugation and violence and death and war and destruction and understand that they have power and that we have the choice of how to use them when we're using that quantum of energy we've been given for the time that we're here to create the kind of world we want to create. It really is an opportunity for, Gandhi saying, be the change you want to see in the world. Be careful of how you use words. And I would say for all people to pray that there's an awakening within Islam before, not that it destroys the world, but that it destroys itself. Because no matter what angle you come from, the light always prevails, and the darkness is always obscured by it and ultimately banished by it. Thanks for listening. I'm Carol Gold. I'll be back here again next week, and until I am, by all means, think for yourself.
Carol thanks you for spending your valuable time with her. It is her mission to empower you to remember how smart and capable you are. Be sure to check out Carol's website, carolgold.com. That's Carol with an E, gold.com. Please leave a review and subscribe here so you'll be alerted to Carol's next podcast. Until then, above all else, remember, it's time to think for yourself.